and we can start with blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu anu la'asot divrei Torah. Amen. So we are in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 41. And just as a reminder, I know Felix mentioned that he's leaving at 10:30 to join Joan Neer at the funeral service for her brother. So if anyone else needs to leave at that time, we certainly understand and appreciate your supporting Joan. So we're continuing the curses. Yes?
Excuse me, I just said, I think I will leave too if I can get into Joan's funeral.
Right, so the Zoom information was in the condolence notice that went out from the temple. And if you can't find that, we'll find it for you. So, verse 41, does somebody want to read for us verse 41?
Sure. It says, when I in turn have been hostile to them and have removed them into the land of their enemies, then at last shall their obdurate heart humble itself, and they shall atone for their iniquity.
Mm-hmm. So I think with this verse, we can see the tone of the chapter changing directions. We're turning from rebuke and curses to a sense of comfort, that whatever our alienation from God is, that eventually there is hope for us to humble ourselves, to recognize our wrongdoing, to do teshuvah, and then the relationship is never totally severed. Even as we use the analogy of a parent. Sometimes the parent has to discipline the child, but the love and the connection is still there. Speaking of which, hi Mom, how you doing?
Hi there.
Good to
what
see
a segue.
Yeah. So Stan read the translation, verse 41 of an obdurate heart.
There's a footnote on it. Is that uncircumcised? Is that?
Yes.
That's what I have.
Yeah. Which text are you reading, Stan?
I'm reading. What is it? The conservative book.
Yeah, the Eitz Chaim.
Jewish Public Society of America.
Yes. So that's the Eitz Chaim. Literally, yes, an uncircumcised heart. So Terry, do you have the Levine commentary?
I don't have it in my hand, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm probably the only one who has that. Then I wanted to read his comment about that. The Hebrew libam ha'arel literally means their uncircumcised heart. This image is best known from Deuteronomy. There's a reference there, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Its sense is that of a thickened heart. Whenever the image of the foreskin is employed, actual physical thickness seems to be involved. The thickened heart cannot feel or think. One whose earlobe is too thick cannot hear God's words. Moses' thickened lips made it difficult for him to speak articulately. According to the law of Leviticus 19:23, trees and vines classified as arelim are untrimmed. In exile, the people will submit to God's will, and their contrition will prompt God to remember his covenant. This theme is expressed in Ezekiel. There you will recall your ways and all the acts by which you defiled yourselves, and you will loathe yourselves for all the evils that you committed. So literally an uncircumcised heart, and Levine, who is the premier scholar on the book of Leviticus, is suggesting that uncircumcised implies thickness, which is used in a variety of contexts that he mentions. When we say thick, that somebody's thick, we use it metaphorically, like they just don't get it. You can't get through to them.
Well, can I comment on the word obdurate?
Sure.
In the middle section, the DUR is hardness. All those words that we have, durable, of course, now I can't think of any. But
Stubborn.
Say it again?
Stubborn.
No, I was thinking of words that have the DUR root in there.
Yeah.
Have to do with hardness.
Endure,
Lisa, what did you say?
duration,
You said endure.
durability.
Endure.
Endure.
Exactly.
All right.
So they all carry a
Durable.
meaning. So I'm not sure it's a very good translation, because I think they could have picked something different than obdurate to translate that. Even hardness would be better than this one, because this obdurate is stubborn like a mule.
What is the Hebrew word, Rabbi Koppell?
Aral. Yeah, let me,
I have a notation here that says blocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in there too on mine.
Livavam
Block.
Arel. Lev is
Arel.
heart. So Livavam, their heart, Arel, which is uncircumcised.
Yeah, interesting.
Huh.
And Rabbi,
To ask-
Stone has it as their unfeeling heart.
I
An
also
unfeeling heart.
wanted to ask you about I'm curious what Hebrew word. I can't read well enough to Hebrew to be able to find the word that they used for iniquity and for atone.
It's avonam. It's the very last word in the verse that is their iniquity, their sin.
Okay.
So can I say something about when you were talking about obdurate and uncircumcised?
Sure.
All of those things seem to suggest that the goal is to, if your relationship, something's in the way of your relationship with God that's too thick, then you need to thin it, trim it. Obdurate and hardness and stubbornness and all of these things, all of this seems to say we need to diminish the barrier that separates you from God, whether it's too thick or it's too hard or whatever it is. It all seems to be make yourself more vulnerable, make yourself more open to your relationship with God.
No foreskins between us and God.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to also look at Friedman.
Yeah, I've got Friedman.
Yes. Oh, well.
It doesn't go into that verse.
Yeah, it's not on that verse. And we read for verse 40.
I think we did.
Okay, good. All right, good. So moving forward then, verse 42, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember also my covenant with Isaac and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. So it's interesting that repetition, just like we have in the Amidah, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. So here the word covenant is constantly repeated. I would wonder if it's the same interpretation. The Amidah, we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, because each one has their own image of God. And here the covenant with each of those individuals each has its own unique nuance. Also interesting that it moves backwards in time from Jacob to Isaac to Abraham.
What is the import of that?
Barry, what were you saying?
Yeah, Stone has a comment, somewhat esoteric, saying the order of the names is reversed, indicates that Jacob alone should be worthy of bringing redemption to his children. And even if his merit is insufficient, there's Isaac's merit. If even that's not enough, there's Abraham, whose merit will surely be sufficient. And that's from Rashi.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it does seem esoteric to me.
Uh-huh.
Sounds more like Passover to me.
So, and it's interesting that the land is mentioned as a separate category, almost as if the land is another person.
That's interesting.
And if, for those of you who are reading the Hebrew, you'll notice that the root for remember that's repeated there, vizacharti, ezkor, so that's the same root as yizkor, to remember. Or we say in the Kiddush and in much of the liturgy, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, in memory of the Exodus from Egypt. So that root Zayin Kuf Resh has to do with remembering. So I did make available to you in the handouts page 314 from this book, Speaking Torah. Anybody have an opportunity to find that and get it printed?
I can't find.
Yep, I got it.
Ah, Barry Singer. Very good. So Barry,
Amazing.
yeah, would you read the commentary? So these are all various Hasidic commentaries, and I thought this was
Which part, starting with when they depart?
right.
When was this sent out?
A long time ago, but Robin scans them all onto that URL, so everything should be available up on our Torah study URL.
What page of the handout is it?
When they
The
depart.
handout, I don't know. It's page.
It's 31 page. It's 31 pages long. How do I find the page we're going to?
Well, you need to.
You
need to look for a page that's page 314.
Okay.
And it says, and the top of the page says Speaking Torah, which is the name of the book. And then it has in big letters Tiferet Uliel, which is the particular commentary.
I'll probably find it by the time Barry's done.
Okay, all right. When they depart.
Okay, go ahead.
When they depart from their iniquities and subdue their uncircumcised hearts, I will recall the merits of their ancestors to forgive them.
All right, so just stop there. Just stop there a minute. So that in itself is interesting. So even if we do teshuvah, we acknowledge our wrongdoing, we repent. It sounds like we're not being forgiven based on our behavior, but hearkening back to the merits of our ancestors. So it's always Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's because of that connection, not because of our own goodness or repentance.
Well, it's good. We get credit. We get extra credit. All right, but we know that if you sin against a fellow human being, you are not forgiven until you appease that person. A transgression against a person really involves two sins. One is against God, who commanded you not to oppress your fellow person, and the other is against the person you harmed. The sin you committed against God by transgressing the commandment may indeed be forgiven by the humbling of your heart, but the sin against the person cannot be forgiven until you seek appeasement directly from the victim. This is the meaning of, and I will remember the land. Their transgression against me, God me, but not having observed the sabbatical, will be forgiven when their hearts are contrite. I will call forth the merits of their ancestors, but still I will remember the land. For their sin against the land, for not observing sabbatical, they will need to seek forgiveness from the land. Therefore it says in the following verse, and the land will have its desired Sabbaths, and only afterwards their sin will be atoned.
So it's a sin against the land not to let it rest. And we can only be, so the land is being anthropomorphized there. That just as God cannot forgive us for sins against each other until we've appeased each other, so until we appease the land, we can't be forgiven. Kind of interesting image. And then
can we extend that, Rabbi? Can we extend that to coronavirus and forest fires too?
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose.
But the land is also a creation of God.
You know, Nona sent out a letter, an article to a bunch of people this week, Nona Siegel, and it's written by a woman who is taking a Native American point of view about the land and the creatures in it, in the plant, all that in nature, and that Native Americans don't refer to it as it. That all of nature has a he or she component, just like we consider people. And the article was, we need a new pronoun for nature, so that we stop regarding it as something, as an other that's not about us. And I thought it was fascinating, and I think it kind of speaks to this.
Yeah, I just want to, I want to find, Martin Buber, when he talks about I, thou, the I, thou relationship, he talks about the possibility of an I, thou relationship with a tree. And if you give me just a minute, I think I can probably put my fingers on it. And because it's so beautiful the way he puts it.
Well, I'll throw back a children's book, Shel Silverstein, The Giving Tree, which all of you
yeah. Okay, let me just pull this up. Okay, I'm getting there.
It's really interesting. There's been so much literature devoted to that kind of thing. Even Moby Dick is a man involved in a relationship with an animal. It's been touched on in literature many, many times.
Yeah, The Giving Tree. I have such mixed feelings about that book. I don't.
Yeah, I have a problem with that, and that other one about. Never mind. I can't think. It's another children's book that everybody loves. It's Robert Munch.
So James, you found it faster than I did.
What is it?
Yeah, this. He found the Buber quote. Great. So, do you want to share your screen there, James, and we can all look at it? I cut and pasted it, but it cut, but it didn't paste.
Sure. Yeah, I can try. Bear with me here.
Okay.
No, I just clicked on it. James, if you have any problems, I have it already.
All right, Barry, just you can put it up there. Thanks.
Hold on. Let's get back to that spot, though. Okay, let's see if I can do it, though. That's the only.
Yeah, just share your screen at the bottom.
Yeah, share the screen, but I wasn't at that spot. So I have to get back to that.
No.
Okay, we'll get there. James, if you're faster, go for it.
I'm working on it. Yeah, I haven't.
Okay.
Apparently, I've got to change some kind of preferences or something.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll.
Yeah, I'm having problems too.
I got it. Let me try.
I'd like to.
None of us will get it.
The Buber reference is really interesting because he also, of course, talks about the I-it relationship.
All right, here we go.
There it is.
I got it.
Okay, somebody got it. Wasn't me.
Yeah. So let's see. Who would like to read this? Terry, you were the one who was talking about this.
I would love to read this.
Yeah, thank you.
I contemplate a tree. I can accept it as a picture, a rigid pillar in a flood of light or splashes of green reversed by the gentleness of the blue-silver ground. I can feel it as movement, the flowing veins around the sturdy, striving core, the sucking of the roots, the breathing of the leaves, the infinite commerce with earth and air, and the growing itself into darkness. I can assign it to a species and observe it as an instance with an eye to its construction and its way of life. I can overcome its uniqueness and form so rigorously that I recognize it only as an expression of the law. I can dissolve it into a number, into a pure relation between numbers and externalize it. Throughout all of this, the tree remains my object and has its place and its time span, its kind and condition. But it can also happen, if will and grace are joined, that as I contemplate the tree, I am drawn into a relation, and the tree ceases to be an it. This does not require me to forego any of the modes of contemplation. There is nothing that I must not see in order to see, and there is no knowledge that I must forget. Rather is everything, picture and movement, species and instance, law and number, included and inseparably fused. Whatever belongs to the tree is included. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no aspect of mood. It confronts me bodily and has to deal with me as I must deal with it, only differently. I think that is just remarkable.
Yeah, I love that.
Is this something somebody can put in the chat so I can send this to Nona?
Yeah, I tried cutting and pasting it, and it cut, but it didn't paste. Or let's say copy.
It should. It looks like you did, right?
You would think, right? Yeah, but it's.
I was able to click on James's link and get it on the internet. Does that help you, Terry?
I'll send it out when I send out.
Send me the link, Marcy. That's great.
I think it's in the chat.
Okay.
Can you get it, or should I email it to you?
Email me, please.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll try to remember to send it out when I send out the notes from the class. So yeah, when you were talking about this relationship with nature, Terry, you can see why that passage came immediately to mind.
All right, Marcy, I've got it.
Okay, good.
And what I like about the way Buber puts it is that it's not an either or. It's not that you're either having this kind of scientific relationship with creation, or you're having this spiritual connection to creation, that they're not mutually exclusive. I like the way he says, there's nothing that you have to not see in order to see.
Yeah.
So, David, did you want to say something? Yes, please.
I find this whole curse area interesting because it's not really a curse to me. It's like a curse is, if I was mad at Barry, I would say, why use such and such with lots of energy and fever, Italian hand gestures, and it's not really thought out. This is thought out and crafted. And it's crafted with a preamble, it's crafted with prologues, it's crafted with witnesses. If you do this, I will do this. This is a legal document. It's not a plan, it's not a curse from the heart. It is a planned document. And in fact, if I was doing some research this week, and one of the things I came across was that the Hittites had documents like this. And if you follow this section against one of their documents, you have the preamble, the prologue. In fact, one of the sections that I found so interesting was the witnesses would be rivers, trees, winds, mountains, or rivers in the Hittite documents, which we are now saying exactly the same thing. And then if you do all these things, these are the sanctions and these are the blessings. This is laid out exactly like a document of that time period of other nations. So I don't feel that this is a curse from God. I find this to be more of a document somebody prepared to remind people every Sunday what your responsibilities are. Mm-hmm. It's not really a curse. The death of your firstborn, the frogs, kinin, those have the feel of curses. This doesn't have a feel of a curse to me. This is just spelling out what your jobs are.
Mm-hmm. So would you be more comfortable with the word consequences rather than curse?
Yep.
I like that. I like that, David. Thank you.
So I don't know.
Go ahead.
What do you think the purpose of this whole section is being written for? I don't buy in. I took the test. I'm totally reformed. So what was this?
A Quaker. I'm a liberal Quaker.
Your
Well, that
pagan
explains a lot. So this is like, it's just written by people for people, but they're using the sanctions of God as they're forced to bring coalition of the community, or to say that they represent the power because this is the words we read to you. I'm not quite sure where this goes or how this was written out.
I think Rabbi Koppell was picking up on the underlying theme here of being redemption, the teshuvah, the turning back to the ways of God, I think is the underlying theme here.
Right, and that's going to be for the rest of this chapter.
But the question is, returning to the ways of God. Felix, when's the last time you took some food to make a sacrifice to the altar?
If I consider myself the altar, that would have been this morning.
Okay, fine. But you see what I'm saying? Some of these things, even the Shemitah year, it doesn't work in a modern society. So we have to come up with legal fictions that this still exists, but we're not going to be able to look at it.
Well, the tradition evolves for sure. And there are those who would argue that had the temple not been destroyed in the year 70, that there would have needed to be, even at that time, a major religious reform, because humanity and its modes of worship was already moving beyond animal sacrifice as the way of worship in the general culture. And that, you know, in a way, the silver lining of the destruction of the temple was that we were able to move past animal sacrifice without having to abrogate the stated will of God in the Torah.
Because when we were studying, I'm not sure if you're listening in on Yochanan ben Zakkai, it was completely revamping Jewish behavior at that time period. So I can't see that the temple ever being built with butane gas and on and off rather than wood sacrifices. So a barbecue system.
Although, you know, there are plenty of our Orthodox brethren who pray daily for the restoration of the temple and the restoration of the way of worship there. And those of you who have been to Jerusalem, have you been to that museum, or it's actually not a museum, it's like a training institute right next to the Koppell, where they have replicated all of the elements that were used in the sacrificial system, and where Kohanim go for training. They want to be prepared that the minute that temple is rebuilt, that they can get in there and the implements will be available, and there will be Kohanim who are trained in how to replicate the sacrifices as they were in the ancient world. So, you know, it is one of the distinguishing features between Orthodox and non-Orthodox liturgy, is that we have removed from our prayer book any reference to the restoration of sacrifice, whereas in the Orthodox liturgy, how that's understood by particular individuals, I don't know. But the stated liturgy says we are praying for the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of the way of worship associated with it. And that is going on even this morning while Felix was having his breakfast. There were Jews around the world offering that prayer. Yes, Terry.
Shalom, everybody. Shalom.
Okay.
It's just that talking about the Eteric Kohanim, the ones who I've met in Israel, and I've met several of them over time, in all humility, if the temple is rebuilt, the days of the Sakari would be back immediately, because there are so many little groups that say they understand in all humility God's will and you don't. And I would pray that we never get the temple back because of the way some of these groups are so certain that they alone have the ear and the knowledge.
Yes.
I was just going to say that a few years ago, there was a film, a mini series made before all this streaming stuff started about the red heifer. Anybody remember seeing that series? No, it was so good. I mean, it was fictionalized, but it had Israeli input because half of it took place, most of it took place in Israel. Had a big Israeli production staff and Israeli actors and things like that, and it was absolutely fascinating.
Thinking of Dig, Terry? Are you thinking of Dig?
Maybe.
That miniseries?
Yeah, I'd love to find it again because I've thought about it a lot over the years. And it had a lot of information about what's going on between not only Jewish sects, but Christian sects as well, trying to be first in line.
Well, if anyone can find it, Barry can find it. He's the film guy.
Barry.
We're looking.
Not
Okay, they're looking right. They're looking right now. So, I think that's my mom. I recognize her. Yep. I just,
looks like it's.
It's a timer.
Yeah. So I just, the way this book is constructed, just to bring it back to where we were, we read the actual text from the primary source, and then the authors have their summary and their contemporary application. So let's just read what we might call in Hebrew the nimshal, the takeaway. So no text in the entire early Hasidic corpus is more relevant, we might even say prophetic, regarding our own day. We will not be forgiven for our sins, gluttony, abuse, overconsumption, among others, until we ask forgiveness of the land we have so abused. But how do we do that? In what language? By what deed? So this was published in 2013. And Art Green is a leader of the environmental, Jewish environmental movement. So you can see where he's coming from. I'm just...
By the way, on Dig, it looks like it's only available for purchase on all the major platforms.
Oh, that documentary you were talking about?
Yeah, it's a fiction. It's a series. It may very well be available in the library as DVDs to take out or to pick up.
What's
Dig, D-I-G. Just Dig.
It's available where?
Only for purchase on all the streaming places. You name it, it's there. But it's a buy, not a rent.
Probably
so it's like $25.
Yeah.
Barry, there's also an Israeli movie called The Red Cow that's available to rent on Amazon. It's a 2019 movie.
All right, well, let's see if we can read through to the end of this chapter. So we're going to look at beginning with verse 43. So can somebody read through 43 to 45 or 43 to 46?
I'll do it.
Thanks.
And the land will be left from them, and it will accept its Sabbaths while it is devastated from them. And they will accept their crime because and only because they rejected my judgments and their soul scorned my laws. And even despite this, when they were in their enemy's land, I did not reject them and did not scorn them to finish them, to break my covenant with them, because I am the Lord their God. So I shall remember for them the covenant of the first ones, whom I brought out from the land of Egypt before the eyes of the nations to be God to them. I am the Lord. These are the laws and the judgments and the instructions that the Lord gave between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai by Moses' hand.
All right.
Ah.
So just a couple of more thoughts. Now going to the Friedman. Becca, you had that on
Yeah.
page 413.
414, do you want me to read that?
Page 413.
413, the crime and their father's crime?
Yeah, and then on to the next page as well.
Okay, their crime and their father's crime. On one hand, this is yet another reminder that it takes generations before the God of Israel will take such actions. On the other hand, it means that the Israelites must recognize that it is not only their own offenses that have led to these things. They must come to terms with their parents' offenses as well. The ultimate revelation of the divine at Sinai includes the fact that the deity reckons fathers' crimes on children and on children's children, on third generations and on fourth generations. Now the perspective is turned to those children generations later, and we learn from the Torah, no less than from Freud, that humans must look back not only at the good that their parents and grandparents did, but also at their errors and faults. It is an essential part of understanding how we came to be what we are. And on the next page, 26, verse 46, these are the laws and the judgments and the instructions. The present age plainly appears to value the ethical more than the ritual in religion. Some even feel the need to justify ritual by attempting to connect each ritual act to some ethical value. Quote, we keep kosher to remind us to care about animals. We wear fringes to remind us to be kind, unquote. This is misleading. Certainly ritual acts can have consequences in the ethical realm, but that is not their reason for being. If we are to understand Leviticus, we must have an appreciation of what ritual meant in its society intrinsically. Ritual can have aesthetic, psychological, and inspirational value. It has the potential of generating feelings of closeness to the sacred, as well as feelings of identity, stability, and security. For some, it means, in a world of uncertainty, to be told what the quote, right, unquote things are, what acts one can perform to feel that one is acting in accordance with nothing less than the will of the creator of the universe. In the matter of purity, for example, one can believe that when one has had contact with any of the group of things that intimidate us, but that are physiological facts of blood, parens, blood and other bodily fluids, bodily sores, death, unparens, one can do things that remove the condition that is contact has produced, and thus remove the fear. In the matter of sacrifice, as we have observed, the ritual has an impact on one's feelings of guilt. In the observance of the holidays, the ritual contributes to feelings of festivity and communal celebration and the sanctification of time. And in the variety of elaborate ceremonies performed at the tent of meeting, officiated by the specially garbed priests, accompanied by the burning of incense, the ritual contributes an aesthetic component to religion as well. All of this is known, consciously or intuitively, to those who have found meaning and even enjoyment in the practice of the rituals of their own religion. The ritual and the ethical are two components of religion and of Leviticus that do not justify each other, but rather unite and produce mutual support. Indeed, it is instructive that Leviticus, a book that is so fundamentally concerned with distinction, does not make any explicit distinction between its ethical and its ritual laws. Sometimes they occur in separate units, and sometimes they are mixed together, but they are never identified as two distinct categories of law. We do a disservice when we interpret ritual matters in terms of ethical justifications. We move ourselves even farther from the appreciation of ritual and the awe before the holy. Similarly, when we say that the Hebrew word, I can't pronounce that.
Kadosh.
Oh, that's kadosh? Okay, spelled so strangely here.
It's a very
It's spelled with a Q, so okay,
it's a very
kadosh.
scholarly spelling of kadosh.
Yes, means a neutral kind of separate rather than meaning holy, sacred. We further lose our feelings for holiness. And perhaps we err similarly when we say that Hebrew chata means to miss the mark rather than to sin, to do something wrong that places us in a state that needs to be remedied through atonement and or sacrifice and or compensation.
Hmm.
That's a lot.
Yes.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Right. And what did David say? Oh, you're recommending a book to us. Good. So just to summarize what Friedman is suggesting. So he's talking about the fact that we look at these teachings through the perspective of ethics and ritual, and we make those as two separate categories, and then we try to understand the ritual as being in service of the ethical, that the reason we engage in rituals is to support and reinforce the ethical, and by doing so we certainly prioritize the ethical component. And that's absolutely what the Reform movement has done. You know, the Reform movement, I think, has made Tikkun Olam the focal point of what Jewish life is about, at the expense of ritual. And Friedman is suggesting that that's not really fair to the ritual, that the ritual has its own depth of meaning that exists apart from whether or not it supports any ethical principle, and that we do a disservice to the ritual by trying to read ethical principles into the ritual. And I think he's not wrong. And I think about this a lot in terms of kashrut. So people talk about the reason we keep kosher is for health reasons. The Torah was trying to protect us intuitively from trichinosis or from any diseases that were associated with bottom feeding shellfish. And that now that we have the Pure Food and Drug Act to protect us, we don't need to keep kosher anymore, if the whole purpose of that ritual was the ethical principle of preserving our health. So I would like to argue that, I mean, you could say the same thing really about Shabbat. So if Shabbat is about fundamentally our restoring ourselves, our need to rest, our need to reorient ourselves into a more spiritual frame of mind, get away from our frenetic pace of work, then why does that have to be on Shabbat together with a community? You know, can't I just do yoga and meditate and achieve the same goal? So the question is, do our rituals stand on their own, or are they only there in service to ethics?
Don't you think that rituals also, let me see, how do I want to say this? For people who are sort of on a path to their engagement with Judaism and their engagement with God, that rituals can feel like an entry point, that rituals can be the beginning of that journey, and that the ritual can grow in its, can help the individual grow in their connection. And so it isn't just that it connects you as a community, we're all doing the same ritual, perhaps at all at the same time, but that I think individuals who are on the journey also find that rituals are the building blocks that draw them closer and closer to the ethical and the spiritual.
So how does that work for somebody who it was born Jewish, born into an observant family? Would there be a difference in your mind then, Becca, as to how they would experience those rituals?
I think that the challenge is if you're born into it, and I was not. I'm an exceedingly Reformed person from exceedingly Reformed parents. But my impression is that for those who are born into the performance of ritual, that I don't want to be rude, and I don't want to say that I don't know if it ever had meaning to them, but it becomes a task. It starts out as a task, and I wonder to what extent have they analyzed that ritual, dug deep into it about why do it in this particular way. So perhaps there are people who have been performing rituals in a rote manner who need to step back and look at it and say, what's behind, the way in which I don't mix these foods, or I don't wear clothes that mix, linen and wool, whatever. I think it obligates someone to step back from the rote experience of ritual.
Yes, Marcy?
I think for some people, ritual might be comfort because they don't need to think about it. They don't need to figure out what to do. They know what to do. So for some people that can be comforting. I think that's just what I'm thinking of as I'm hearing Becca talk.
Well, and Friedman says as much. He says, for some it means in a world of uncertainty to be told what the right thing is, what acts one can perform, feel that one is acting in accordance with nothing less than the will of the creator of the universe. So I think that's just what you're saying. There's a certain amount of comfort in doing a ritual and doing it with precision. But I think to Becca's point, we can mistake the ritual for the whole and make the ritual an end unto itself.
Oh, absolutely. Because I know somebody who goes so much by ritual that I feel like, are they missing out on something because they won't think about it? They won't go outside of it. Whatever the ritual is, that's it. And for them, it works. For me, it wouldn't. Just one person's opinion.
Yeah, no, I think we each do have our own nature and different needs, but I think it's critical to be honest with ourselves and to not. I think sometimes as Reform Jews we dismiss ritual because it's inconvenient, and so we justify our non-observance of ritual by saying, well, we understand the lofty principle behind it, so we don't need the ritual to enforce it.
So that raises another question of, is our religion flexible enough for individuals to create new rituals, to go beyond the rituals that we have, and make something that is perhaps not just meaningful to an individual, but meaningful in the context of the world we live in now?
Well, look how much play there is now for the blessing for putting on a mask. I know that's been circulating. That's been circulating on the internet, and there's a contemporary ritual right there. I'm thinking also just from the perspective of being a female rabbi. So when I grew up, and there were no women rabbis, there's no formal mourning in Jewish tradition for a miscarriage, or even for that matter, for the loss of a child who dies within the first 30 days after birth. And it was only when Jewish women began to enter more of a leadership role in the community that we were able to say, look, this is, sure, in the ancient world, we understand, miscarriage and infant mortality were the norm, and it might have made sense, and it might have made especially a sense to an exclusively male leadership, that you don't want to constantly be in a place of mourning. But that is also an example, I would say, of a more recent ritual that has emerged to be very meaningful, is to say, in 2020, you get pregnant, in America, you expect that you're going to have a healthy child who's going to live to adulthood and outlive you. That's just the unspoken expectation. And when that doesn't happen, that is an event that ought to be marked by some ritual expression. There's a lot that comes to mind from, just from that perspective of women's role and where women fit into the culture. Rituals for recovery from rape. not something that was part of the normative tradition. Even the baby naming for a girl that we now accept as so common is a recent phenomenon. When in the traditional universe, when a little girl was born, her father got an aliyah on the first Shabbos after the birth, and her name was announced, and a prayer was said for the recovery of the mom, and a prayer that this little girl should grow up and give birth to male children. So, not the most positive way of welcoming little girls. Well, we've seen, all of those rituals welcome the birth of girls. That's a totally recent phenomenon. So I guess my answer to your question, yes, Becca, the tradition can evolve and new rituals can develop. Not sure, I was going to say I'm not sure how much that goes on in the Orthodox world, but look at even something like bat mitzvah. Bat mitzvah, clearly Mordechai Kaplan's daughter Judith was the first one to have a bat mitzvah, a public bat mitzvah, I think in 1934.
Wow.
So girls in the Orthodox universe still don't have a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah that's parallel to that of boys, but in many cases, maybe even in most cases, there's some public recognition of that transition in the young girl's life when she turns 12 that is called a bat mitzvah. It may not be what bat mitzvah looks like at Temple Chai, but it's moved into a public realm in a contemporary way. And Sherry, did I see your hand? Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that there's another important aspect to ritual beyond the support of ethics, and that is to help children. Children can understand the ritual.
Yes.
They can understand the consistency year after year of doing something. And as they mature, they start either questioning or understanding more the rationale for the ritual. So I think that just dismissing ritual as a support for the ethics is a bit short-sighted.
So you're with Friedman. Yeah, I think it's a great point. And Sarah Lee, hold that thought 1 second. I always felt that with the bidikat chametz before Passover, that was so important when I was raising children, that as my kids were going to have their whole world rocked by not being able to have pasta and bread for a week, that having this big ritual of, we're going to go through the house with the feather and the candle and the spoon, and we're going to hunt all the chametz, and we're going to burn the chametz. You're right. That was like vitally important to help them understand the transition that was about to impact them. Sarah Lee?
I look at ritual as a very important part of life. To me, it is the icing on the cake. Otherwise, everything would be dull and boring. And the ritual brings something of excitement sometimes, and anticipation, and a feeling of belonging and celebration. And as I said, to me, it is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, and our tradition is so rich with ritual elements. I think when you think about the 3 festivals, Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot, Passover, you have the matzah and the seder with all of its symbolism. Sukkot, you've got the sukkah and the lulav and the etrog and, all these cool symbols. Shavuot is really lacking in those ritual elements. And I think it's part of the reason that it's very lesser known and underobserved, because it just doesn't have all of that. Yes, Sandy Koppell.
I think Shabbat is our most important ritual. We have it every week, and it's always been important to me. Even when I sit alone at a Shabbat table, I still feel it's a special day. And I think that's important. Maybe that's because I'm conservative.
No, I don't think so. And
even though they say I'm humanistic in your poll.
Yeah, somebody was saying earlier, I think it was Felix. No, Terry said every day you have to like check the calendar to see what day it is. You know, that's part of, you know, the importance of having Shabbat to give that structure and order and meaning. And if we look at the last paragraph of what Friedman had to say here, so the Hebrew root kadosh comes from a root meaning separate or different. But he's saying we lose something if we translate it just based on that root meaning and don't use the word holy, that there are implications of holiness and awe and wonder that are important in the translation. And he says the same thing with chata. You know, we make a big deal, you know, al chet shechatanu, al chet, for the sin that I sinned. And we make a big deal at the high holidays that the root meaning of the word chet is from archery. You know, I was aiming and I missed the target. Now I have to refocus my aim to hit the target in the right direction. And he says, no, call a sin a sin. You know, that's when we say to miss the mark, and when we say different rather than holy, that we're not capturing the essential, really ritual richness of that language. So we are almost done with chapter 26. I do want you to try to find for next week, starting on page 291, the couple of pages from Leibovitz. And I'll try to dig them out from the URL and send them to you separately so you can look at them. But she's got a commentary here. It's called Hope Despite Holocaust. Very intriguing on those last verses of chapter 26. So next week we'll pick up with that. Let me make a note. It's called Hope Despite Holocaust from Nechama. And then we're going to go on to Leviticus 27, the last chapter in the book of Leviticus.
How many years has this been?
Leviticus?
34. No,
but
for the whole Torah?
I don't know. Leviticus.
I remember when we finished Deuteronomy, I remember we had a Shabbat morning where we celebrated, and I can't remember how many years ago that was, but
I know.
Only Phyllis knows.
I know. I was there. Excuse me. I was there.
You were?
Yeah,
Okay,
I was at the very first class. We're probably at around 33, 34 years.
No,
like
I
that.
meant just Leviticus.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's got to be at least 4 years.
I think 4.
Much longer than I thought it would take.
I remember.
Boy, this summer I want to finish Leviticus 27 no matter what.
But remember, that's
Rabbi's famous last words.
Yeah, but Felix.
Yeah, I'm planning ahead. I've got Genesis here. I'm starting to study it.
That's Prager. Oh boy.
Felix, did you try to get on to the funeral and you couldn't?
Correct. I couldn't get past the waiting room.
Yeah.
There were 2 meeting IDs, each with their own passwords. I tried both. I tried one twice. I tried the other ones, and just couldn't get through.
Well, I'll just put Joan's email in the chat, and if anybody wants to send her a note, I'm sure she would appreciate that.
I will say
folks,
to you, Rabbi.
What's that?
I will say to you, Rabbi, that all about Leviticus, when I was in the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva, the rabbis literally skipped over it. We did not cover it.
that's what happened with this group. So this group started, as Becca said, 34 years ago, did Genesis, Exodus, Numbers. I picked up somewhere in Numbers with the group Deuteronomy. And when we finished Deuteronomy, I said, you guys skipped Leviticus the first time. Now we're going to go back and look at Leviticus.
Because Rabbi Burke
is-
said, there's no way I'm doing this. I mean, he just refused to lead us through that.
All right.
Rabbi,
well,
we
remember-
finished the last time was end of 2014 because I found the emails about
Oh my
when I sent you
God.
the statement.
So we've been in Leviticus for 6 years.
6 years?
And I remember Rabbi Koppell saying, and we're going to get through this really fast. That's what I want to do.
Well, but we did it in less than 1/5 of the time.
Okay, there you go.
Studying.
We did it in less than one
I am
generation.
making no such promise with Genesis. I think I will be gone from this earth before this group finishes Genesis.
But
I told
Rabbi will
someone- I
follow you
told-
anywhere.
Yeah. I told someone the other day that we had been studying the Torah from beginning to end. We were just about done. And they said, oh, how long? I said, 30 some years. And I got this long silence. They couldn't fathom that.
We're
Absolutely couldn't fathom
very slow readers.
it. We're thorough.
We're
Thorough.
very thorough.
Well,
Very
you can
thorough.
all look at azrabbi.com and find my Twitter Torah. You can, if you want it the fast route. You know, I did reduce the entire Torah into one tweet teaching for per chapter. So
You have
it's
nothing else to do with your life. Okay.
Well, this explains the 40 years in the desert.
Yeah.
all right. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hallelujah.
Shalom.